we doing, guys? Gals? Out there in jazz YouTube land? It's a Thursday morning. I was so puffy from allergies. Today we're going to talk about album number April, a jazz standard that ends up in the hands of a lot of different players. And two particular versions we're going to talk about today, just as a comparative thing. First, I want to talk about a great film from the 70s called Network, directed by Sidney Lumet. The great Howard Beale character, as he goes to the window and goes, "I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore." And he gets the people in the apartment buildings all kind of echoing that same message. And he's a news anchor. And he's tired of the bullshit. He's tired of the misrepresenting and shading the truth. He's tired of the bad stories and headlines and the war and the ugly. And he has a meltdown on air one night and just speaks some truth with a little bit of madness. And initially, he's got to be fired. He went off script. So it's a comment even at that point on the media and how scripted and designed the outlay of things are to create two sides that she'll never meet. And it's that division that we still struggle with today. But after he gets fired, they bring him back because the ratings soared. And so in their greed, they bring back a man who's probably having a breakdown, mental breakdown as they were called in those days, and exploit him. They put him back on the air, and it's an interesting unfolding. I don't want to ruin it for people who haven't seen it. It's one of the great films of that time. And there ends up being a few moments that will really make your hair stand on end. Seeing the exploitive nature of media and the greed that drives it and sets all those headlines up. But it's that Howard Beale melting down on air. And I want you to get up. I want you to go to your window. I want you to stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." And he kind of keeps going on this whole diatribe, and for a while the ratings keep soaring and soaring, till eventually he probably gets a little too close to some nerves, and I think he gets fired again if I remember, but it's very revelatory. And there's a scene where a big CEO kind of sits him down at the table and explains to him that the truth he's unfolding unravels a whole lot more of the onion than just you clearing your conscience. The economics of the world as is, and this is back in 1974, 75, are wrapped up in the conceptions and misconceptions that the media portrays. And without us being blinded by those perceptions and illusions, the economics that exists couldn't persist. And to tinker with it, you tinker with much more than just a headline and a little bit of teletype. You're messing with the entire cosmos and chain reactions of the global economy. And it's just interesting that you don't think that the corruption that exists in economics and media and government was as clear to people in those days as it is today. And if they could see how it is today, they'd be like, "Oh my God," with the two different streams of news and every story being shaded multiple directions. And boy, they really driven a lot of that stuff home today. But it's a very prescient film. It's very ahead of its time. The guy who wrote it, his name escapes me right now, was a very, I think, liberal-leaning socialist almost, if I remember. But it's a powerful film. It really is a powerful film. And every once in a while, I want to go on air myself here on YouTube and Howard Beale it. And that's partly why I'm mentioning this. Someday, I might just have had enough. Enough of the politically correct garbage. Enough of the nonsense. Enough of the watching channels that just talk fluff, grow and surge, and get all these little things. And you sit here, you talk about real issues and real music and the real art, and it's hard to get viewers sometimes. And I don't care too much. It's never been the backbone of my life to do this, but it still might lead to a Howard Beale moment someday. And it's classic literature and art, that film. And if you have never seen Network, you should watch Network. It's a great film that will leave you thinking. It really will. And the Howard Beale character will leave an imprint. Because the frustration, the sick of the bullshit. I can't read another bullshit headline right now. I can't read another mistruth, untruth. I'm tired of the negativity, the foaming of hate, the fomenting of fear. And it's just a great piece of art that I've really held dearly for years and probably need to watch again pretty soon. So tell me in the comments if you've seen Network and what you think. And I'm guessing a lot of my audiences will be pretty familiar with that film. I think it's in high circles in terms of how it's revered and praised today even. So I'll Remember April was a song that was written back in like 41, 42 during the war for Abbott and Costello. And during the war years, the Abbott and Costello type of things, the Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, that was partly what kept America giggling, was the silliness of the slapstick, the descendants of Charlie Chaplin, the whole kind of lightness and brevity. And you as a kid, you grew up watching that stuff, at least I did in the 70s and 80s. That stuff was on Sunday afternoon television, so you would watch the Abbott and Costellos and Laurel and Hardys and even some Charlie Chaplins and take in some of that black and white history. But the song was written for that film, 42 with Abbott and Costello, and it's instantly Woody Herman does it. And of course, Woody Herman is one of the leaders of the great swing bands of that era. He's coming into prominence at that point. He has a minor hit with it, from what I understand, but the song kind of becomes perpetually a part of the jazz canon, and still is. And it's a beautiful melody. And I think a lot of what's important in doing a song like that is to state that melody clearly and to really enunciate that emotional context. It's a song about love lost, the relationships of life as they move on through their seasons. I'll remember April with a smile because that was the good times. That's when we were still in good health and love was honest, and the refrain of spring still brought hope and renewed promise. And that fades as we get into our autumns. And as our winters set upon us, optimism becomes a tougher thing to channel. And so that youthful remembering April has value in many settings. And so I think the great players kind of can emote that nostalgic kind of sense, that kind of feeling of looking back and connecting with when things were different, better, more positive. So it becomes a real standard. You see Parker with strings does a version that's one of the seminal versions of this, and it's probably the version that I think of first when I hear it. It just pops in my head, and when I hear other versions of it, I've always got to kind of compare it with Parker. Bud Powell does it again the very next year in 51, both for Teddy Reed at Roost. Then, of course, I think someone else does it at Roost shortly after that, Sonny Stitt. I wrote down here a list of people who did this song, who are preeminent jazz names. I'll give you a kind of a chronological, and this is an abbreviated list I'll add. Like I said, Herman in 42, Parker in 50, Bud Powell in 51. Chet Baker does it in 53 and again in like 55. Mingus does it at Beale Bohemian in 55. Miles Davis does it for the Blue Haze record, which is one of the records we're going to talk about here in a second. And Davey Schildkraut kind of does Parker on that. And it was always kind of an eye catcher, ear catcher for me. It's a bit of a throw grabber. I mean, Schildkraut's a killer. Not a name most people even know, even being on a Miles Davis record. Lee Konitz does it in 54, I think on the Storyville 10-inch. Clifford Brown, of course, in 56, which is the other version we're going to talk about. He does it with his great group of Max Roach and Richie Powell and George Morrow, and of course Sonny Rollins is in that saxophone chair replacing Harold Land. Stan Getz does it in 54, 58 with Chet Baker. Again in 83 he does it. Sonny Clark does it on his trio record in 57. Shirley Bassey in 59. Ahmad Jamal does it, I think at the Pershing. Hampton Hawes does it in 58. Bobby Darin, the great singer, in 59. I said Sonny Stitt, who does it at Roos in 59. Grant Green in 61. Yusef Lateef at Prestige in 61 and Into Something, I think it is. Matthew Gee, the great trombone player who played with Ellington. I think he played with Basie for a little bit. Has a great record on Riverside. He does it on that Dolphy in 61. Bill Evans in 68. Dizzy Gillespie in 65. Dexter Gordon in 65. Red Rodney in the late 60s. And then the list of singers here, it's a who's who of singers if you think about it. Julie London on her Calendar Girl record, Dinah Washington, June Christie, Carmen McRae, Bing Crosby, Perry Como, Doris Day, Frank Sinatra, Dinah Shore. So you got I'm a big Bobby Darin fan. His records are always really fun. He's got a beautiful voice. And you should hear the singers do it to get the melody and get the lyric and get the feeling of the song, so that when you hear the trumpets and saxophones reiterating that emotion and that lyric, you can understand where it's coming from, have a place to have context. But so it's a long list. Billy Taylor in 54. So it's like I have most of those versions of those songs too. So it's a song I've heard done infinitely. But two versions also, aside from Parker's version, which I think is the seminal version of that song. It's the Show Crowd Miles Davis from Blue Haze 10-inch. That's always had a real impact on me. And then, of course, Clifford Brown, Max Roach, Sonny Rollins, live at Basin Street in 56. Part of me's curious. This is from 56, maybe recorded in 55. There's Rollins. Rollins is still kind of a being discovered name here. But he's on par with Miles, really, in terms of his fame. Clifford Brown's a bigger name than either of them at this point. Just real up and coming. And his tone is so clear, it just makes your eyes water. It's such a beautiful, bright, crystal sound. But it's never fragile. It's soft and warm, and his punctuations. He's got graffiti. You know what I mean? He's got the graffiti of the church in his sound all the time. But I think these are fun to listen to side by side. To compare Clifford versus Miles, and to hear the different intonation, tonality, approach, rhythmic punctuation. Again, singers can have different voices as well. So it's not about who's better or who's worse. But it's always interesting when you hear one's version of a song, you kind of think of the other players. And again, everyone here I think is echoing Parker to some degree. But I wonder how early Clifford was doing this. Because I think everybody was trying to copy Clifford to some degree. And it's really fantastic hard bop. And the restating of that melody is part of what makes it hard bop. In bebop, we would have just forsook that melody, not even stated it. We just would have used the chords and gone nuts. Hard bop, we're going to bring back that chorus, that melody, and then improvise on it. But still give the listener that framework. That's an important difference. And again, Clifford's just on fire, and Rollins brings some real sweet, caramel tone here. He's a guy still kind of searching for his identity, as is Miles at this point. This is a nice old copy of Blue Haze, the 12-inch version. And again, Miles, of course, is playing muted here, but it's still an up-tempo. I mean, it's still up-tempo, Miles. not his strongest setting. But another interesting side note here is I have the OJC of this, which I've had for the longest time. This probably goes back 20 years in my collection. I probably found this one 5-6 years ago. It's a little beat up, but it still plays wonderfully. And I always like to have the old ones when I get the chance. Again, that's not a big. I'm not a big collecting for the value of things or the showmanship of it. It's about the learning and the grasping. And as you get older as a collector, you value the old ones just for the unique layouts, and you can tell right away, like, oh, this is an old one. And the write-ups and the lack of other labeling on there from other labels and printing presses. This is a collection of various sessions, with John Lewis, Mingus on piano on track, Percy Heath, Max Roach shows up, or Silver's on a couple tracks. But on I'll Remember April, it's Davey Shokrat with Miles, Horace Silver, Percy Heath, and Kenny Clark on the drums. Kluk's one of the great drummers of this era. Heath was, of course, one of the three Heath brothers. Horace Silver's, of course, at Bruno doing Jazz Messenger stuff, and he's about to kind of really embark on that with Blakey and then go his own way a few years later. So Silver's a fun, punctuated, rhythmic player who I really am a big fan of. But I'd be curious to know if Clifford was doing this live and before Miles did it. Because like I said, a lot of people were kind of following Clifford at that time, and Miles was not Miles as we know it. Miles was still an up-and-comer at this point, kind of a little bit in obscurity. He was waiting to be kind of rediscovered at Newport by George Avakian a couple summers later. But what I noticed today for the first time is the covers are different. The green here isn't transparent, whereas this one here, where the green goes over the blue says you can see underneath the blue. These colors here are all just kind of blocked, like paper laying on top of each other, where this one has a depth to it. And that makes a huge difference in how they look. I mean, again, the overlaying, the see-through translucence versus just how much more work would it have been to do, I don't know. I'm sure it was a money thing, because all things are. But OJC, they used to be fairly commonplace, original jazz classics. And OJC, as you can see there, his number is 093, but it's Prestige 7054. So they let you know that this is a Prestige title. They redo the Prestige logo inside. So all the OJC records will have the original artwork for the most part on them, with the original labels with a few OJC decals added. But like I said, they used to be pretty common, but they've gotten much more difficult to find. They're usually sourced and printed from analog. They sound fantastic. They were available for really good prices, like $5, $6, $7 in the 80s and 90s. And they've become fairly rare today. But if you get a chance to get an OJC, it's a great way to collect the old catalogs of Riverside, Contemporary, Debut, Prestige, Jazzland, New Jazz. All those labels, plus a few others, were amalgamated by Fantasy Records over the course of the 60s and the 70s. They reissued them all under one umbrella called Original Jazz Classics, but I said they retained the original artwork and even the original album logos for all the various labels, so you knew the history at least, even though you had a modern repressing of it. So I'll Remember April, a great standard. And do you have a favorite version of it? Of all those ones I mentioned, there's dozens more. Was there one that really jumped out at you as a version that you loved? And if you don't know it, listen to Parker, listen to Clifford, listen to Miles, listen to a few others. Cannonball does a nice one. It seems that the alto saxophonists really were drawn towards this song. But again, maybe it's because Parker established it and put the envelope out there. And all the other cats were like, oh yeah, let me try to fill that up. So that's today's episode. I'll Remember April. Great song. a great jazz standard that you'll still hear if you go into a jazz club today. Today it's going to be in the mid 80s, and then we drop down into the 60s, which might mean the end of summer here. It's a short but hot summer in Minnesota, and we've had a pretty hot, some storms, but not as crazy as it was last year. But it's just nice to kind of be back in a normal routine. Kids back in school for senior year. So blessings and safety to everybody. Hope you all are doing great. We'll talk to you all soon. And if you're mad as hell, stick your head out the window and yell, "I'm not going to take it anymore." Howard Beale, we love you. Peace.